Scary Story Podcast brings original, short, scary stories right to your ears every week. Like Dead of Night, the story of a man who moves into a new apartment building only to discover its sinister foundation. Or another recent one, Sessions, where the classic tale of an imaginary friend turns even darker. You can join us by searching for Scary Story Podcast on your app right now. It's a show by Scary FM. I'll see you over there on Scary Story Podcast.
Across the world, you'll find stories of mysterious people who hold the ability to change their shape. However, amongst these tales, you'll also find that not all of them mean the same thing. Some are what are known as skin wearers, gaining powers by putting on a pelt or a mask, now able to move and hide as a bear, a wolf, or seal. Others are, instead, spirit walkers, known to cause harm at a distance, traveling through the darkness of the night, spreading illness or fear to their victims. Then there are the curse bearers, marked by oath or malice to ensure that the change occurs whether the individual wills it or not. This variation is likely the most famous, with the werewolf being the most prominent of its examples. There are distinct similarities between each of them, and yet they are all significantly different at the same time, spread with different languages and told with different rules in place. It is these differences that matters the most, though, and it is important we respect and understand the basis of where these legends come from. This is how we keep folklore from turning into nothing but a Halloween costume. That is why, when we talk about these specific people amongst the Navajo in southwestern USA, it is important to not only discuss the shape-shifting elements, but the specific moral code that come with its teachings, cautions, and overall history. A history that many, seemingly, do not fully understand. My name is Luke Mordew, and this urban legend is Skinwalkers. In the American Southwest, across what is now known as Arizona, New Mexico, and Utah, are the Diné families. To these Navajo people, the family context is meant broader than a household, referring instead to a matrilineal clan system called Ke that links people through 4 clans. You were born to your mother's clan and your father's clan, with 2 more from your grandparents. These kin ties shape roles, responsibility, who can marry whom, and who has the right to share certain teachings, with one important factor being the stories that are shared. Amongst many Diné families, teaching about skinwalkers and other form of witchcraft are not meant for public circulation, and those who do speak of them very carefully for several reasons. Many believe that naming or discussing these matters can draw unwanted attention, and so protocols have been put in place about when and how stories are told, often in winter and in community settings, with knowledge passed by those who carry the right to share it. As we found with other American Indian legends, a history of outsiders taking pieces of indigenous belief, stripping them of context and turning them into spectacle has continued for many years. And with that in mind, silence becomes a form of care for these families. It protects community boundaries, prevents harm, and keeps teachings from being flattened into monster of the week folklore. It is also why public summaries stay high level, and why sensational details from older outsider texts should be consistently treated with caution. I recognize that by talking about this at all, I am moving against the preference of those who would rather these topics not be discussed with outsiders at all. But my aim is not to pry into restricted knowledge or to decode any of their personal ceremonies. It is instead to describe what has already entered the public record, to separate pop culture Skinwalker imagery from Diné teachings, and to correct the easy mistakes that come from rumor, television, and internet retellings. Where possible, I have relied on native-led sources and have avoided specifics that are not mine to share. I will not be describing procedures, rituals, or anything that could be misconstrued like instruction. With that said, we shall begin my telling of an encounter with what very well could be perceived as a skinwalker, as we follow Brian on a late-night drive in his van. Brian's eyes were already heavy by the time the sun had gone down over the vast landscape of Utah. He wasn't even sure where he was anymore. It felt like he hadn't seen anything but slick rock, red sandstone, and distant tall rocks for hours before the darkness took over. It was beautiful. That was undeniable, but driving across it for such a long period of time had created a feeling as though he had never made progress. The distant rocks didn't seem to get any closer, and the landscape never seemed to change. It probably didn't help that he had been driving for 17 hours already, fueled by nothing but anxiety and coffee. When he had been offered a job working as a PA on a film set, he jumped at the chance. He had dreams of working in the film industry long before he ever deemed it to be a possibility, which is one of the main reasons he moved to California in the first place. That and the beaches. He was keen to impress, which is why when the prop department announced that they'd be looking for a particular Native American artifact and needed someone to pick it up for them, he jumped at the chance to be that savior. He hadn't quite realized upon accepting the role just how far this would take him though, spending hours alone driving across states. He didn't know why they needed this particular artifact. He didn't even know what it was. All he knew was that it was a legitimate piece from a local Native American tribe that had been kept by a rich collector. There was no reason they couldn't have made their own version of it for the film, but the director was one of those intense types who required as much authenticity as possible. Brian didn't even know what the story of the film was supposed to be, but he knew it was set amongst a Native American tribe of some sorts. An idea that he found extra confusing when he noticed that there didn't seem to be a single Native American on site. When Brian finally arrived at the collector's ridiculously large house, the item was already wrapped and secured in a large wooden box, just like those Brian had seen in the Indiana Jones type films, emphasizing just how important this whole trip was to be. He had driven the entire 13 hours in a day, only giving himself 5 hours of sleep in a local motel before having to get to the pickup point. Now, he was on his long leg home, having to be back on set by midday the following morning. This would give him time for another 5 hours of sleep before he continued the last leg. Although, the motel stop wasn't due for another hour or so yet, and the way he was feeling suggested he wasn't going to make it with ease. He could feel the haze growing around his eyes, emphasizing a vignette of shadow around the already dimly lit road in the headlights. He kept the radio playing loudly, allowing the loud beats of the songs to vibrate through his body. Although this did little to help him for longer than a few minutes, as he quickly got used to it, finding his tired mind was already drowning it out in glazed thoughts. That was until a disturbance suddenly appeared in the road ahead. Brian's eyes instantly shot open as a strange, animalistic figure darted from the shadow, passing across the road at rapid speed right in front of his van, causing him to swerve with a sudden sharpness that must have awoken the entire desert that surrounded him. He hadn't moved fast enough though, it seemed, as he felt the harsh vibration of something colliding with the corner of his van as he skidded across the concrete. He slammed his foot on the brakes, his hands firmly gripped to the wheel as his eyes now sat wide open and alert. He calmed his breathing for a moment and shook his head, clicking off the radio, knocking himself back into reality as he registered the sudden events. It was a coyote of sorts, that much was clear. Although its legs seemed strangely elongated and crooked, as if they had continued to grow even into its adult years. He didn't get much of a look at it other than that though, with the encounter being so fleeting and sudden. Why it had run out in front of him, he didn't know. But then again, who knows why animals do half the things they do at times? With that in mind, he flicked open the glove compartment beside him and pulled out a torch, jumping out of the van to check the cargo in the back. It was strange. For a second, the air was filled with nothing but blood-pumping panic and the sounds of screeching rubber against concrete, and yet now, there was nothing but the sound of a gentle breeze in the air. There was no rumble of an approaching car, no birds fluttering above, no tapping of little footsteps across the sand around him. Just the gentle hum of his van that now sat quietly in the road. He studied the surrounding area, trying to see if he could catch a glimpse of the animal, hoping that it wasn't too hurt by the encounter. He would have hated to leave it to die, but he wasn't sure if he had it in him to put it out of its misery either. Luckily, it was nowhere to be seen, causing him to question whether he had actually hit it at all. This was one of two reliefs to come, as he flung open the back of the van to reveal the cargo was still firmly locked to the ground, safe and sound. He rubbed his face, focusing on the silver lining of the situation. Nothing died, nothing broke, and it gave him a much-needed wake-up call. With this in mind, he made his way back to the driver's seat, panning the torchlight across the low, dry bushes that scattered across the landscape as far as the torchlight could reach. But once again, there was no sign of a coyote or any evidence of an injury. That was until something strange caught his eye in the distance. A figure darting behind a bush as the torchlight hit them. Although this figure was not that of a coyote, nor was it in the shape of any animal. It looked to be a man, tall and slender. Brian didn't stick around to investigate, nor did he call out to ask any questions. He had heard the tales of those tricking people into stopping their vehicles, laid as a trap to rob and murder them, and with that clear in his mind, he jumped back into the driver's seat and sped off as fast as he could. An hour and a half later, Brian was finally in the semi-comfort of an old wooden motel room, sat on the thin, harsh springs of the mattress below. He was exhausted, but he had made his checkpoint, allowing him to finally relax for a moment. By now, the shock of the near miss had completely subsided, and he was more tired than ever, with the adrenaline it caused sucking out the last remnants of energy he seemingly had within him. He checked the morning's drive on his phone one last time, confirming for the third time that day that he had to get up and leave by 6 a.m. in order to make the call time. It calmed his anxiety to double-check though, and at least with that fresh in his mind, he could relax. With that, He plugged his phone into the wall by the bed, set his alarm for 5:30 a.m, and began to brush his teeth, still pottering around the room, sorting things out for the following morning as he did, putting his things together, throwing away his fast food containers, and double-checking the van outside one last time before closing the curtains. Although, as he did this final task of the night, something curious caught his eye once again. Under the bright, neon sign that lit the road with an intense glow of red, stood a man, tall and slender, dressed in a dark leather coat, smoking a cigarette. These are the types of people you see often in motels up and down the country. That he knew. But that wasn't what got his attention. It was the fact that this man was seemingly watching him through the glass. Brian hesitated for a moment, his toothbrush still hanging from his mouth as he stared back at the figure, who still chuffed away on the cigarette, clasped firmly in his fingertips. It was nothing, Brian was sure, and he didn't have the energy to stay up any longer worrying about strange figures, and so he whipped the curtains closed and promptly fell asleep. It was the intense growl of a loud motorbike starting up outside that woke Brian up the following morning, beginning his day with instant irritation. He laid on his back and rubbed his eyes, taking a deep sigh as he considered just how tired he still was. It almost felt as though he hadn't slept at all. With that in mind, he rolled over and picked up his phone to check how much longer he could comfortably lie festering in the sheets. But it was here, in this moment, that he was hit with a dread that far exceeded anything he had felt the previous night. The plug on the wall must not have any power going to it, and his phone was completely dead. His heart sank as he rose, flinging his body out of the bed and yanking open the curtains. It was clearly still early morning outside, but it was most definitely not 5:30, with the sun already stretching up into the blue sky above. Through many screams of profanities and stumbles over clothes, Brian had managed to get himself up and ready in less than 5 minutes, a task made easier by ignoring any washing or brushing of teeth. He slammed his door behind him and unlocked the van, flinging his bag inside as he promptly followed, jumping into the driver's seat to get moving. He turned to the ignition, ready to get moving as fast as he could, keen to make up for any lost time by any means necessary. However, the dread of things going wrong hit heavily once again as he realized that no matter how many times he twisted those keys, the engine did not rumble. In his frustration, he screamed, slamming his hands against the steering wheel as he twisted the keys one final time, as if threatening it to behave this time. Unfortunately, this didn't work either. It took another 10 minutes for Brian to even find a member of staff to help him jumpstart his van. Then another 5 to confirm that he'd even be willing to do it. And by the time he was back on the road, it was already 7:20 a.m, leaving over an hour later than he should have done. He spent the next several hours driving as fast as he possibly could without drawing too much attention to himself, now having to deal with the text messages that were growing more and more aggressive with each passing minute. Although somehow, and against all odds, he had arrived at set only 45 minutes later than he was meant to be there. You wouldn't know it by the reaction of the crew, however, with the prop master instantly darting at him, already effing and blinding as he flung open the van door. He didn't ask for any further explanations. There was no time for that. There was seemingly no time for any form of gratitude for the amount of driving and time the whole trip had taken for something as silly as an ancient artifact that they could have easily replaced to begin with. But this was the film industry, and who was he to complain? Instead, Brian kept his head down and rushed off to sign himself in as the prop master and his team began the preparations to unload the van. Brian was exhausted, frustrated, and a little sick by now. But he had done it. After seemingly being hit by a curse of bad luck, he had managed to make his way back to set on time. That was worth a pat on the back for himself at least, even if the crew were never going to show their appreciation for it. Although this small moment of pride was to be short-lived, as he arrived back to find the prop master was even more furious than before, screaming and shouting about how it was possible Brian could mess this up as much as he had, exclaiming that if it was a joke, it was time for Brian to fess up right away. Confused, Brian edged closer to the van, sheepishly passing by the angry crew members that studied his every move. And as he turned to peer into the cargo hold, his eyes widened once again, being hit with shock and horror for the 4th time in a 24-hour period. The van was completely empty. Nothing but a note left pinned to the wooden board at the back. The prop master began to shout and swear again, likely asking for some kind of explanation. But Brian didn't have one, nor was he even listening anymore. How was it possible everything could go so wrong so fast after coming across a strange coyote? What was happening? Brian stepped away from the berating crew and climbed deeper into the van, studying every nook and cranny as if expecting to find some sort of clue. Although this wasn't necessary, as once he arrived by the note, an answer was already laid out for him. Written in black ink across the off-white sheet were a few simple but clear and firm words. Simply reading, "None of this is yours to take." Skinwalkers, or Yi Nadlushi, are deeply rooted in the Navajo culture found in the southwestern United States, described as being a dangerous type of witch that represents the darkest form of witchcraft in Navajo tradition. It is often cited as important that these are very different from the beneficial medicine people who instead use their knowledge to heal. To the Diné people, this distinction is important, as it sits within a broader understanding of what is called witchcraft or the witchery way, understood to be the moral opposite of healing practice. Navajo witches are said to represent the antithesis of Navajo cultural values, with the community healers and cultural workers given positive terms, such as medicine men or women. In order to battle this, and to fully understand the ways in which to do so is their job. Medicine men and women are often taught about the evil magic these witches are said to perform, and by fully understanding what they're dealing with, they can be informed in what to fight against. However, if any of those learning were to be enticed by the power of evil magic, then they could find themselves corrupted, becoming witches themselves. Children's tales and cautionary stories echo this moral world. The Skinwalker often fills the big bad wolf role, a danger that teaches vigilance and responsibility, rather than being a mere monster. The Navajo people as a whole are very cautious about discussing any of this with outsiders, no matter who they are, due to a couple of factors. First are those that believe that speaking about such things can invite attention from them. And secondly is because there are actual protocols in place on who can tell who, what, when, and in what settings. Yi Nalnushi, which precisely translates to, by means of it, it goes on all fours, are said to be one of several types of witch within Navajo belief systems, with these in particular performing in twisted ceremonies and enacting manipulative magic that sits opposite to the works of those using their knowledge for medicinal means. In fact, they are often described as growing stronger the more they manage to unbalance others, knocking the strength of the family. It is said that the Yi Nalnushi hold the ability to disguise themselves as animals, more often than not being predatory species such as a coyote, a wolf, a fox, an owl, a crow, or even a bear. And it is thanks to this shape-shifting ability that they are able to move distances without being detected by either animal or human. Although there are apparent telltale signs that something about them is off. Some have described them as having an unnatural gait or strange proportions. Others have claimed that although they look like animals, they still move like a human, walking on their hind legs. Descriptions also claim that if you were to look into their eyes, you would see that there was something human about them, not quite fitting in with the animal shape that surrounded them. Although some have even claimed that their eyes have the ability to glare red when lit. They are known to lurk out of sight, sometimes even mimicking human voices to lure victims closer, avoiding bright lights if they can. Although, what many outsiders seem to misinterpret when it comes to the stories of skinwalkers is that these witches do not take the form of an animal as a mode for attack, and instead use it almost exclusively for stealthy travel. In fact, harm is often explained through witchcraft linked to death-related pollution or substances, especially so-called corpse powder made from human remains and blown or smeared to sicken a target. If you were to look up the Skinwalker legend, you will likely come across several modern retellings that claim skinwalkers can raise the dead or control corpses. But this seems to be a misinterpretation or purposeful exaggeration, as classic Navajo-centered sources emphasize instead that it is actually corpse-related pollution and poisoning that are used, with the intention to cause illness rather than literal necromancy. What has seemingly happened over the years is that people who find themselves drawn to the seemingly dark and spooky elements of the world are often guided by a Eurocentric viewpoint. This is, of course, due to several factors, including our expansion, media control, and colonization. But due to it, beings like skinwalkers tend to be simplified and turned into more cryptid-like entities as if a werewolf. There are, of course, similarities between the two ideas, but there are significant differences. Werewolves tend to have little to nothing to do with witches, and in many interpretations, the werewolf is a victim of a situation unable to control itself once the full moon rises. A skinwalker, however, does not lose itself in its animalistic form, and is far more a shapeshifter in style, an evil human with the means to use dark magic at their will. That being said, this is seemingly not a one-way street, as Navajo children themselves have begun to adapt and morph European folk shapes to fit their stories also, sharing urban legend tales such as the Hook Man amongst themselves. Only here, the hooked killer is substituted by a conniving skinwalker. The path to becoming a skinwalker is described in some outsider ethnographies as a twisted initiation that transgresses core taboos, including, but not limited to, the ultimate violation of kinship. There have been claims made that, as part of the ceremony to transgress into a skinwalker, a witch would need to commit a murder, specifically the killing of a close member of their family. However, this is often talked about amongst groups outside of the Navajo people, and there are no confirmed writings of the Daya people confirming this. What is confirmed, though, is that within Navajo society, fear of these entities has shaped specific cultural taboos, such as prohibitions against wearing the pelts of predatory animals, which might be misconstrued as attempting to transform. In this way, the legend reinforces cultural boundaries and appropriate behaviors, whilst often also providing explanations for misfortune or unusual occurrences. This can be a helpful way in which people can make sense of the world around them, although this does not always have positive outcomes, resulting in events like the Navajo Witch Purge of 1878, which proved that fear of these entities went beyond folklore to impact social structures and behaviors. The purge came only a decade after the Diné returned from the Bosque Redondo at Fort Sumner, where they were detained from 1863 to 1868, following the Long Walk of 1864. Communities were rebuilding after years of forced removal, disease, famine, and suppression of ceremony. But now, grazing herds were smaller. Sickness still lingered and ceremonies had been long interrupted. On top of that, the US Army's promised ration system had begun to breed resentment amongst the Navajo people. And with all of this happening at once, a climate was made that opened them all up to feed into frustration and distrust. When harm is suspected, the first step is not confrontation, but diagnosis and repair. Families are told to consult a knowledgeable Hatofli, known as a singer or medicine person. Alternatively, they'll be taken to a diagnostician, such as a hand trembler or crystal gazer, who determines what kind of help is needed and when it can be done. Public accounts describe remedies that aim to restore balance and right relations rather than perform a punishment. Depending on the diagnosis, a singer may prescribe protection work rooted in blessing way, enemy way for ghost sickness, or other evil way ceremonies. The focus is on cleansing the person and the home, removing or neutralizing harmful objects, rebuilding protections, and re-establishing obligations. Work may include prayer and song, sand paintings, herbal washes, or smoke with cedar, pollen offerings, and guidance for the household about conduct and timing. People are often cautioned against naming names or seeking revenge, which is viewed as, instead, feeding the problem and risking further harm. The specific songs and sequences are not detailed, but it is clear that healing belongs within qualified practitioners and a family working together to put things back in order. Among the Diné, witchcraft is not only a spectacle or taboo subject like it is in the rest of the US, it is a serious social crime, acting as a way to deliberately injure kin and community. And these rose when herds died without cause, when the strong grew suddenly sick, and when buried bundles were found where no one should have been digging. From 1863, under orders of US General James Carleton, Kit Carson forced Diné families off their homelands, and in 1864, thousands were marched more than 300 miles to the Bosque Redondo camp at Fort Sumner. Conditions there were terrible, with bad water, crop failures, disease, and consistent hunger causing many people to die. It was in June 1868 that Navajo leaders signed a treaty that closed Bosque Redondo and allowed them to return to a portion of their homeland. When people returned from the Long Walk in 1868, they carried with them grief, fewer livestock, and a social fabric torn by forced removal, famine, and surveillance, and it was in that environment that rupture, inequality, and suspicion grew. Witchcraft accusations offered a way to identify an enemy within, when so much of the harm had come from outside. Headmen and various families all gathered together to trace their misfortune, not with a mindset to hunt, but with the intention to clean out dark spirits and help their people. Unfortunately, in order to do that, they would need to seize numerous suspected witches and kill them. This led to roughly 30 to 40 people being killed in an attempt to save their livelihoods. Precise numbers are hard to certify because records come from trader correspondence and oral histories compiled decades later, but 40 seems to be the common consensus. Some later sources suggest figures like Ganado Mucho and Manuelito took roles in ordering or allowing executions, though once again, details come from what we have had passed through memory. What is consistent is the moral logic reported in these accounts. They truly believed that the killings were a form of protection, a harsh attempt to rebalance a world out of balance after war, exile, and return. In the aftermath of this, caution became far more important, and now people were even more careful about when and how such matters were discussed. Silence was now serving as a form of care, a way to close the door against further harm and to keep complex teachings from being flattened into mere monsters. American Indians rarely have monsters that exist for monsters' sake. Almost always, they are dedicated to a purpose or goal that in some way represents a particular tribe's belief system, community, and worldview. With that in mind, we have found that skinwalkers are not the creatures that are widely shared around the internet and afar, nor are they akin to the European werewolf. They are dangerous and yet aware witches, who attack through sly cunning rather than monstrous bites and slashing claws. An evil looking to dismantle and corrupt rather than brutalize. That being said, their story has undoubtedly spread, now appearing in newspapers, late-night radio, reality TV, YouTube videos, social media posts, artwork, and forums around the globe. And from here, reports pile up, evidence thins, and the details tear at the seams. In many ways, skinwalkers outside of the Navajo people exist only in name, becoming something else entirely.
Every legend begins with a story, a noise in the dark, a shadow in the woods, something we can't quite explain. I'm Josh, host of Out There, a cryptid podcast, where we explore cryptids, hauntings, folklore, and the unexplained. From the Wendigo, to the Hat Man, to the mysteries of the Mary Celeste, we dig into the evidence and the fear behind each tale. So, what do you think? Are cryptids really out there? New episodes every Thursday, wherever you listen to podcasts.
If you're still listening, you likely share the same fascination with strange stories and unexplained legends that I do. For just £3 a month on Patreon, you'll unlock Modern Myths, an exclusive bonus series released in the week between our chapters, ensuring that you get an episode a week. You'll also get behind-the-scenes insights, discounts on merch, and access to our private community chat where you can connect with me and other folklore fans. I even name characters in my stories after patrons at random, so your name could become part of the retellings themselves. Your support fuels the research and the production and ensures our understanding of these legends continue to grow. Click the Patreon link in the show notes to join us, and together we'll keep folklore alive. But for now, back to the legend. Over the years, a number of reports have been shared, telling stories of apparent Skinwalker activity, ranging from full sightings to odd behaviors that are intended to terrify communities. Common reports include tapping on windows at night, as something tries to get their victim's attention. Some also talk of hearing harsh cries at night, screeches that match no animals in our current lexicon. Then there are the strange sightings of animals moving in unsparing, unusual ways, with some even being described as walking on their hind legs. Now, out of the gate, we can answer many of these, as many have perfectly reasonable explanations. First is the tapping at the window, which would, of course, be unnerving to anyone, although it's worth remembering that birds are known to peck at their own reflections. Not to mention the many times bugs hit the glass, branches knock in the wind, and houses generally just creak as materials heat and cool. Regarding the shrill calls, that could be several things, such as the great horned owl, which is known to boom in the night. Then there's the barn owl, which hisses and screeches. And that's not to mention the coyote's chorus in overlapping yips that can sometimes have a surround sound effect to them. Then there's the strange descriptions of unusual gaits in animals or unnatural movements amongst them. However, this is likely almost always down to an animal being injured, whether that be damaged or missing a limb, or even things like mange. All that being said, stories of skinwalkers have begun to spread rapidly around the Western Hemisphere, morphing into another urban legend in the guise of a cryptid amongst those outside of the American Indian tribes. In fact, over time, they have become one of the most misunderstood but most widely talked about creatures said to exist on the shores of North America, with perhaps the most famous association being with the Skinwalker Ranch in Utah. The place itself is ordinary on paper, a roughly 512-acre spread in the Uinta Basin southeast of Ballard. In 1994, the Myers family sold the land to Terry and Gwen Sherman, who then sold it to Robert Bigelow in 1996, before changing hands once again to Brandon Fugel through Adamantium Real Estate in 2016. Although it is all that happened throughout these years that makes the location a place filled with its own mythology. Its notoriety seemingly grew in two waves. First came the book, Hunt for the Skinwalker, in 2005, which pulled together the Shermans' 1994 to 1996 accounts. In these stories, they discussed a supposed encounter with a giant wolf attacking a calf. And although they shot at it, the bullets seemed to do nothing to slow it down. They also described tales of blue orbs that are said to have killed their dogs, and bright lights and spacecrafts floating over the ranch. They even went as far as to describe poltergeist-style disturbances in the house, as well as crop circles, multiple cattle mutilations, and even a yellow tunnel in the sky from which a figure was reportedly seen to emerge. It seemed as though the couple was spreading stories about anything they could possibly think of, using every supernatural narrative they could muster. Although it seemed to work for them, and the interest in their land grew significantly. Then, in 2020, a new TV show was released on the History Channel titled The Secret of Skinwalker Ranch. This, as you can imagine, significantly amplified the curiosity around the location worldwide. Between the book and the series, the catalogue of strange events now includes orbs, lights in the sky, equipment failure, poltergeist-style activity, a so-called bullet-resistant wolf, cattle mutilations, and reoccurring electromagnetic anomalies. Although, even in sympathetic write-ups and all this, you will find the admission that little of this has translated into the kind of data you would expect to see in peer-reviewed literature. When the ranch is framed as a place where the land itself behaves strangely, it helps to remember what the basin actually is. It is an oil and gas-bearing basin with a lot of iron-rich rock deep below the surface, with minerals like magnetite and old volcanic rocks naturally affect the Earth's magnetic field. Geologists map these effects by flying small sensors over the area to measure tiny changes in magnetism, revealing aeromagnetic anomalies, which essentially means that the field wiggles from place to place due to the rocks underneath. In a basin like Uinta, that has proven to be expected, and oil companies even use these maps to understand the geology. So if a compass drifts a little, or a handheld meter spikes every now and then, that is not paranormal on its own, although it's easy to see why it would seem that way to someone who doesn't know this science. The ranch itself sits near the Uinta and Ouray reservation of the Ute Indian tribe, where it was consistently known as the Sherman Ranch, although, amongst some, the title of the UFO Ranch was growing along with it. That was until the release of George Knapp and Colm Kelleher's 2005 book, who brought the name Skinwalker into the title and press cycle. When the property was sold to Adamantium Real Estate, the location was filed for US trademark under the name of Skinwalker Ranch, which it now still goes by to this day. Of course, this has irritated Navajo and Ute people, as not only has it bastardized an important part of their folklore and belief system, but the owners of the property have even claimed that the land has an ancient Navajo curse on it, a curse that the Navajo have claimed to have no evidence of. More recently, in 2024 and again in 2025, the ranch has promoted another specific claim on television. It was in season 5 of The Secrets of Skinwalker Ranch that the team showed a dead cow with a rib bearing a clean puncture. Here they began to float the idea that the force and dimensions suggested something like a dire wolf, an animal that went extinct between 13,000 and 11,700 years ago. Season 6 circled back to the theme with a jawbone recovered from a nearby creek, again hinting at direwolf-like dentition. This has been framed in promos and fan spaces as the first physical evidence of a possible skinwalker. But as we've learnt, that is not how skinwalkers work, if they were really out there to begin with. The television series has done more than anything to push both the ranch and, by extension, the legend into the mainstream, with Sky History carrying the UK run and History's own pages packaging highlights and clips for a broad audience. It doesn't end there though, as in 2018, a feature documentary titled Hunt for the Skinwalker helped cement the ranch's mythology for film audiences. TV shows outside of these documentaries have also repeatedly circled back to the narrative. There's even a Skinwalker installment to Animal Planet's found footage docudrama Lost Tapes. Podcasters also continue to discuss the topic, with us now even joining the chorus. In games, the legend shows up most clearly in indie horror and survival genres. Skinwalker Hunt on Steam puts you in the role of a monster hunter tracking a shape-shifting witch, which is at least more accurate to the original lore. Console and browser titles such as Skinwalker strand you in a frozen wilderness where the creature hides amongst wildlife, while the long circulating freeware RPG Maker story game, also titled Skinwalker, follows a camping trip undone by an impersonator in the dark. And because of the aforementioned ranch becoming a brand of its own, newer titles even borrow the setting outright, such as The Skinwalker Investigations, which frames a mysterious ranch as the stage for UAPs, creatures, and poltergeist-style activity. In 2016, the use of skinwalkers caused quite a stir when J.K. Rowling released her History of Magic in North America book. In her text, she equates skinwalkers with wizarding animagi, and even suggests the legend arose because native witches and wizards transformed without wands. J.K. Rowling is known to use folklore from all around the world in her stories, repackaging them to fit her famous magical world of wizardry. In this, though, she recasts the Skinwalker as a wizarding shapeshifter story invented by non-magical people to demonize wizards. That flips the Diné moral framework and turns a community-governed teaching into open franchise law. Native scholars pushed back immediately on this, with Adrienne Keene of Native Appropriations arguing that the piece collapses many distinct nations into a single Native American culture. It also strips context from Yi Naglushi and violates community protocols by turning sensitive teachings into fantasy backstory. Of course, it's her story and hers to do with as she pleases. But when taking important aspects of cultures, particularly ones that have had so much stripped of them already, it's important, and at the bare minimum, respectful, to take care when doing so. With her interpretation, she has warped a very real Diné moral universe and recasted it as superstitious natives merely being mistaken for European-style magic. This is largely why American Indian commentators called it appropriation rather than homage. Online, you'll find much of the same idea. Videos of supposed sightings of a skinwalker shared with the intention of triggering fear rather than legitimate documentation. The dates of the sightings remain vague. The places continue to change, with the footage consistently blurry and pixelated no matter how much our cameras improve every year. The story spreads because we, as a species, love scary stories and mysteries of all kind. The existence of a monster suggests that perhaps there is more excitement to the world than we realize. Overall, there are lessons we can take away from how this story has been handled. When a Diné category is treated as a generic monster, folded into European law or used to market a location, its meaning is often stripped away from it. There are ways in which we can take inspiration from each other without completely reframing it. There are also some important lessons within the story of Skinwalkers that are worth spreading within the legend itself, with importance placed upon diagnosis, protection, and restoration rather than chasing vengeance or revenge, treating the cause of the issue rather than simply punishing for the effect. This legend deserves accuracy, and its people deserve respect. With most folklore, the monsters, mysteries, ghouls, and ghosts tend to have a lot more story than you may have originally thought. Learning about them can only strengthen our connection to them. In order to keep them alive, we must remember them in full.
Urban Legends is researched, written and produced by Luke Morgie. Co-edited by Sophie Tickle. Music by Billy Japp. With additional sounds from Storyblocks and Invato. If you liked what you heard and want to hear more, please like and review our show on your chosen podcast provider. This simple task is a big part of our show's continuation and growth. To access more chapters through our bonus material, early releases, ad-free content, and more, become a patron by clicking the link in our show notes. To follow us on TikTok, Instagram, or YouTube, simply search Urban Legends Folklore or visit lukemordew.com/podcast. If you have more information or a correction on anything said, email us on luke@lukemordew.com. We aim to ensure that all information provided is accurate and up to date, and this remains a top priority.